The return of the county fair.
A year ago, the Alachua County Fair just stopped. The official report called it a tragic accident, a structural failure, a gas line explosion from a food vendor. The story changed a dozen times. But I was there. I saw what really happened. I saw the thing that wore the skin of a carnival worker and fed on that beautiful, terrible energy of the crowd.
Now, after a year of silence, a year of people trying to forget, the fair is reopening. The posters are bright, promising a return to fun and games, a celebration of community. They've even moved it, as if changing the location could wash away the stain of what happened. But I have to wonder, what else is about to return? Welcome back, listener, to Sleepy Echoes Unwind, where the night remembers old stories. Light your lanterns, slow your breathing, and let us drift together into the hush of the night. Section 1. The Uneasy Calm. They're calling it a fresh start. The Alachua County Fair found a new home, moving from its spot near the Gainesville Airport to the old Canterbury Equestrian Showplace in Newberry. They're calling it the Alachua County Agriculture and Equestrian Center now. It's a name that sounds solid, dependable, safe. A name meant to bring up images of 4-H clubs and prize-winning animals, not what I saw. The papers are celebrating the end of a 30-year search for a new fairground, an $8 million investment, and shiny new facilities. They talk about honoring the long tradition of fairs in this region, but what they don't talk about is why the old grounds were abandoned so fast. Why the dirt there feels so wrong, so fallow. I've spent the last year buried in archives trying to make sense of it all. My thing has always been fairs and carnivals. Not the clean corporate ones, but the originals. The traveling midways that moved like locusts across the country. Strange towns unto themselves, crackling with an energy that was equal parts joy and peril. They were liminal spaces, temporary cities of light and sound on the edge of town, and they thrived on intense emotion. The thrill of a ride, the frustration of a rigged game, the first blush of summer romance, the primal fear of a funhouse. It was a perfect buffet. My research kept leading me back, not just to the fair, but to the land itself. Florida is old. It holds its ghosts close, and you hear their whispers everywhere if you just listen. I found clippings from the late 19th century describing a traveling show, Professor Alastair's Carnival of Wonders, that was plagued by a series of bizarre, fatal accidents. Unexplained fires, sudden panics, bouts of madness. The locations changed, but the pattern was always the same. The last known sighting of Alastair's Carnival was on a dusty piece of land just outside of Newberry, the very same land where the new fairgrounds now stand. Coincidence? I stopped believing in coincidence a year ago. The town of Newberry is trying, you have to give them that. There's this forced optimism in the air, a desperate need to reclaim a beloved tradition. They see the new fairgrounds, the freshly painted barns, and think it's a symbol of resilience. I see a freshly set table. The local news ran a piece about how people are excited to see the place shiny and new again. But you can't just pave over a memory. You can't outrun a hunger that has slept for a century. The gates open tomorrow. The lights will come on, the music will start, and thousands of people will pour onto the grounds, bringing all their hopes, their laughter, and their fears. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it will be there, waiting. I have to be there too. How can a historian turn away from history in the making, even if it's a history that screams? Section 2. The first cracks. The opening day felt unnervingly normal. The sun was bright,
the air thick with that familiar, cloying smell of popcorn and cotton candy. Families pushed strollers, teenagers dared each other onto the rides, and the sounds were all correct, that cheerful, chaotic symphony of a county fair. I walked through the crowds, feeling like a ghost, my notebook heavy in my pocket. I told myself I was just there to observe, to document, but the part of me that still has nightmares was scanning every face, every shadow, searching for the first hint that something was wrong. For hours, there was nothing. Just a fair. The county was leaning hard on the agricultural side, with gleaming stalls for livestock and proud kids from 4-H and FFA showing off their work. It was wholesome. It was safe. I almost let myself believe I was wrong, that the move to Newbury had actually broken the cycle, that we'd left the monster behind at the old grounds. Hope is a foolish, dangerous thing. The first crack appeared just after dusk. It happened at a simple ring toss game. A father was trying to win a giant stuffed bear for his daughter, getting more and more frustrated with every plastic ring that bounced off a glass bottle. The carny, a young guy with tired eyes, offered him another bucket. "Guaranteed winner," he said, his voice totally flat. The dad agreed, and on the very next toss, the ring didn't just land on the bottle. It settled. It seemed to melt for a split second, warping like hot plastic, before solidifying perfectly around the bottleneck. It wasn't a lucky toss. It was physically impossible. The carny's practiced smile never changed. He handed the bear to the thrilled little girl, but as the family walked off, I saw the carny's hand, the one that held the bucket, tremble violently before he shoved it deep into his pocket. He didn't look at the ring, still perfectly, unnaturally stuck to the bottle. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes a little emptier than before. I moved on, my heart pounding. It was an anomaly. A trick of the light. I was looking for patterns, so my mind was creating them. That's what I told myself. Then I saw the second crack, over by the carousel. The painted horses rose and fell to a tinny, cheerful tune, but on the inner ring, one horse was moving out of sync. While the others glided up and down, this one, a black horse with wild, painted eyes, seemed to stutter. It would rise, then jerk down, then rise again. Its movements were sharp, almost biological, like a real animal fighting its pole. A little boy was riding it, laughing, completely oblivious. His mother, though, was standing by the railing, frowning. I heard her say to her husband, "That's strange. It feels like the whole platform is vibrating." I got closer, my eyes locked on that horse. As it passed, its painted eyes seemed to meet mine. For one terrifying instant, I saw the painted wood ripple. I saw a flash of something deep inside the carved eyeball, a flicker of ancient, hateful intelligence. I felt a wave of cold so deep it felt like it was coming from inside my own bones. The air around the carousel smelled faintly of ozone and damp earth. I wrote it all down, my hand shaking so badly the words were barely readable. Location, time, the impossible ring, the living horse, the cold. My observations felt like an indictment. Section 3. The new host. As the night got deeper, the fair's energy shifted. The wholesome agricultural vibe faded, and the raw, frenetic energy of the midway took over. The screams from the rides weren't just joyful anymore. They were laced with real panic. The laughter had a manic, brittle edge. The darkness between the flashing neon signs seemed deeper, more absolute. And I started to see more. A funhouse mirror that reflected a figure standing behind someone when no one was there. A whack-a-mole game where one of the moles wouldn't go down, its painted face twisted into a snarl. A food vendor stirring a vat of oil that wasn't bubbling from heat, but from something thick and dark moving just under the surface. Each incident was small, isolated, easy to dismiss on its own, but together they formed a constellation of wrongness. That's when I realized I was looking for the wrong thing. I was searching for a single source, one person like the groundskeeper last year. This was different. The entity hadn't possessed a single host. It was spreading like a virus through the fair itself. It wasn't in one person. It was in dozens. A touch here, a whisper there. A carny offering a prize that felt cold to the touch. A ride operator staring a little too long at the spinning gears. It was a network. And the fair itself, the noise, the lights, the emotion, was the web. But there had to be an epicenter, an anchor. My search for Professor Alistair had given me a clue. His curse wasn't just about chaos. It was about performance. It needed a showman, a focal point. My eyes scanned the midway, past the barkers and the game runners, and landed on the main stage, where a magician was performing. He called himself Magnifico. He was charismatic, all flashing smiles and dramatic gestures. His tricks were standard stuff: cards, coins, a woman in a box. But there was an undercurrent to his performance, a charge in the air that wasn't just showmanship. When he'd ask for a volunteer, his eyes would sweep the crowd with this unnerving intensity, as if he were shopping for a specific kind of soul. I watched him do a classic levitation trick with a young woman from the audience. As he waved his hands and she started to rise, the crowd gasped. But I was watching his face. His smile was fixed, but his eyes were distant, hazy. And the woman, she wasn't just rising. Her body was twitching, her back arching at an unnatural angle. A silent grimace of pain flashed across her face before being replaced by a placid, empty smile. The crowd saw a miracle. I saw a puppet on invisible strings. After the show, I followed him. He didn't go to a trailer. He walked to the edge of the fairgrounds, to an undeveloped patch of land near a new pole barn that had been brought over from the old grounds. He just stood there, his back to the midway, staring into the darkness. And as I watched from behind a large generator, I saw the air around him shimmer. The sharp silhouette of his body seemed to blur, to soften, like a watercolor painting left in the rain. For just a moment he looked taller, gaunter, the same shape I saw in that glitched footage from a year ago. Professor Alistair had found his new stage, and his new leading man. Magnifico wasn't just the host. He was the conductor of this whole horrifying orchestra. Now, listener, this is where it gets complicated. Knowing the source is one thing. Figuring out how it all works is another. And I was starting to suspect something truly terrible about my own role in this. If you've ever been in a place that just felt wrong, a place that held a dark memory, let me know in the comments. Your stories are important, and if you want to see how this one ends and what I found in the dark heart of that midway, make sure you subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. Section 4. The Midway's Descent. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That notebook, filled with my meticulous observations, it wasn't just a record. It was a menu. My attention, my academic focus on each paranormal event, it was acting like a lens, concentrating the crowd's energy and feeding it directly to the entity. My presence wasn't just useless. I was actively making things worse. I wasn't just the historian. I was the catalyst. I watched from the shadows as Magnifico walked back toward the midway. He moved with a new confidence, a new energy. The blur I'd seen around him was gone. His form was sharp and solid now, like he'd just had a full meal. He passed the carousel,
And as he did, the stuttering black horse broke from its pole with a sound of splintering wood and shattering metal. It bucked wildly, throwing its child rider into the safety netting. Panic erupted. As parents rushed forward, I saw Magnifico pause, a small, satisfied smile on his lips before he melted back into the crowd. He hadn't touched a thing. He'd just been near, charged up by me. The chaos spread. The whole fabric of the fair began to unravel. It wasn't a series of small incidents anymore. The entire midway was becoming hostile. The Ferris wheel started spinning at a sickening speed, its lights strobing aggressively. The funhouse mirrors no longer showed fleeting glimpses of figures. They showed distorted, monstrous versions of the people looking into them, their reflections screaming silently. The music from the rides warped into a discordant funeral dirge. I was the problem. My very act of observation, the core of my identity as a historian, was amplifying the curse. Every time I noticed an anomaly and wrote it down, another thread would break somewhere else. I noted the grotesque change in the funhouse mirrors, and moments later, the entire hall of mirrors went dark, trapping people inside with their screaming reflections. I documented the unnerving speed of the Ferris wheel, and the gears of the tilt-a-whirl began to grind and smoke. I felt a cold, creeping dread. The entity, this Alistair consciousness, was a creature of performance. It fed on attention. The generic, unfocused attention of the crowd was its bread and butter, but my specific, analytical, fearful attention, that was a delicacy, an accelerant. I thought I was a detached observer, a scientist studying a phenomenon. But in this nightmare, the observer effect was literal. By watching the experiment, I was empowering the monster. I wanted to run, to drop my notebook and drive until the neon glow of the fair was just a bad memory. But what would happen if I did? The entity was already deeply embedded. Would it just continue its slow feast? Or would my leaving cause it to lash out? And what about the people trapped here? I couldn't leave them, but I couldn't stay. At least, not as a historian, not as a watcher. I looked at my notebook, at the pages of careful, terrified script. I had been documenting a curse. Now, I had to find a way to break it. And to do that, I had to do the one thing that went against my every instinct. I had to stop watching. Section 5. Confrontation. How do you fight something that feeds on your attention without looking at it? How do you cut the strings on a puppet when your gaze just makes them stronger? The answer couldn't be in observation. It had to be in distraction, an overload. If my focused attention was a gourmet meal, I had to create the supernatural equivalent of a food fight. I needed to make so much chaotic, undirected noise that my own signal would get lost in the static. My mind raced through my research. Old folklore, rituals of banishment. They almost all relied on direct confrontation, on naming the demon, on looking evil in the eye. That would be a death sentence here. But there were older traditions, ones based on confusion, on noise, using bells, rattles, and dissonant music to make an environment uninhabitable for a spirit. I had a desperate, insane plan. The fair itself was the instrument. I just had to force it to play a different tune. I ran to the central power control booth for the midway. The operator was slumped over his console, his eyes glazed over, staring at the chaos on his monitors with a placid smile. One of them. I didn't have time to be gentle. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and slammed it into the main circuit breaker. The midway died. For one blissful second, there was silence and darkness. The strobing lights, the grinding gears, the awful music, all gone. A collective gasp went up from the crowd, followed by panicked shouts and crying. I knew I only had moments. In the emergency gloom, I ran. My targets were the game stalls. I vaulted over counters, grabbing anything that made noise. I threw handfuls of plastic balls against metal sidings. I found the air horn prizes from the balloon pop stand and jammed them on, the deafening blare cutting through the night. I knocked over stacks of glass plates, creating a symphony of shattering sound. I wasn't an observer anymore. I was an agent of chaos. I wasn't watching. I was doing. From the corner of my eye, I saw him. Magnifico. He was striding through the panicked crowd, his face a mask of cold fury. The power outage had cut him off from his network, and he was heading for the source of the noise. For me. He needed to reestablish control. He needed to make me watch him. I ran toward the high striker game, the one where you hit a lever with a mallet to ring a bell. The mallet was heavy in my hands. As Magnifico approached, his eyes locked on mine, and I felt that familiar cold, that psychic pressure to focus, to witness his power. "You," he hissed, his voice a layered chorus of his own, and something ancient and raspy. "The observer. The feast." "The show's over," I said, my voice shaking but loud. I refused to look at him. Instead, I looked at the bell at the very top of the tower. I poured all my focus, all my fear, and all my intent into that one simple object. I wasn't observing him. I was focusing on the solution. He lunged, but he was slower now, weaker without his network. I swung the mallet, not at him, but at the game's pad. I put every ounce of my strength, every bit of my terror into that single motion. The puck shot up the track with an unholy speed. It didn't just hit the bell, it shattered it. The sound wasn't a cheerful ring. It was a deafening, soul-shaking clang that was both a sound and a shockwave. A wave of pure chaotic energy erupted from the broken bell. For a split second, every light on the midway, every shattered bulb, every dead neon tube flashed on at once with a blinding, sterile white light. Every speaker emitted a single, excruciating burst of static. It was the system crashing, a total overload. When the light faded, Magnifico was on his knees. The blur was back around him, but this time it was fleeing, peeling away from him like smoke in a hurricane. The magician, the man, looked up, his eyes clear for the first time, filled with confusion and terror. He looked at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. The gaunt, shadowy presence of Alistair was gone, its network shattered, its anchor severed. The environment had become too noisy, too chaotic for it to maintain its hold. The conclusion. Emergency services descended on the fairgrounds, their own lights and sirens adding to the noise. The official story was already taking shape. A massive power surge, a cascading system failure, mass panic. They would find logical explanations for everything. A faulty generator, an inexperienced operator. They would never, ever know the truth. I slipped away before they could ask any questions. My notebook remained where I'd dropped it, its pages scattered, the ink of my observations bleeding into the damp ground. My role as historian of this event was over. I learned a terrible lesson. Some history isn't meant to be recorded. Some stories are so hungry that the simple act of telling them gives them life. The Alachua County Fair at Newberry did not reopen the next day. It's still closed. They talk of safety inspections and lawsuits. I have a feeling it will never open again. The land will sit quiet, just like the old fairgrounds. A fallow field, waiting. Did I break the curse, or just force it back into hibernation? I don't know. I only know that the hunger is still out there, and it has a taste for being watched. What happens to an ancient evil when the audience goes home? That is a question I hope I never have to answer. You know, history is full of stories that hide in the margins. If you believe some things are better left undocumented, share this with someone who understands that not every mystery needs a solution. And until next time, be careful what you pay attention to. You never know what's paying attention back. Thank you for joining this moonlit journey. If you'd like to unwind with more tales each week, light your lantern and subscribe. For now, blow out your lantern. We shall meet again.